Okay, you guys, quick video on passive transport here. Try and get this a little bit closer here. A little bit closer. Move this down a little bit. There we go. Okay. So hopefully that'll focus enough for you to see. And we're going to talk about passive transport. Passive transport, I like to say, is kind of like if you wanted to ride your bike down a hill. Okay. Would you really have to pedal, or could you just like kind of go wee, like lift your feet up and just kind of coast down? You could just like kind of coast down. Wouldn't take any energy, and you go from a high to a low. Well, passive transport is just like that. It requires no energy. So let's write that first. Requires no energy. Okay, and that's very important because life really doesn't want to spend energy if it can't. Okay, so remember, it requires no energy. No energy. Okay, and usually passive transport is going to go from areas that have a high concentration. So high concentration. We'll get into concentration in a second. To areas of low concentration. Okay, so high concentration would be like highly concentrated, a lot of molecules. Low concentrated would be just a few. Okay, and obviously molecules want to spread out, just like people want to. Okay, like if I shoved you all on one side, which I wouldn't do during a COVID thing, but if I shoved you all to one side of the room or like right to like a corner of a room, you wouldn't want to stay there. You'd want to have your space. Well, molecules like to have their space too. And because they're constantly moving and bombarding against each other, they move from a high concentration to areas where there's like more space, lower concentrations. There's three types of passive transport that we're going to talk about here. One is just simple diffusion when there are no barriers. There's no cell membrane to go across. Because remember, we're talking about living things. And if we can understand what happens at the cellular level, we can understand what happens at the organism level. So in simple diffusion, there's no barriers. This would be examples like kind of like smells or odors. Okay. Let's say you walk into your house and you smell spaghetti sauce and you're like, you love spaghetti. So you love spaghetti. You smell that cooking, you smell the garlic and the tomatoes and the onions or something and all the spices. And you're like, yummy, yummy. That's an example of simple diffusion. It's all coming from that pot where it's all like boiling and being like cooked. But the smell is diffusing out from that high concentration to a low. Excuse me. Thank you. Anyway, another example of simple diffusion is, did you ever wash a red shirt in with the white laundry? Well, if you ever did, and that red shirt bled, meaning like it like kind of leaked all its like red coloring into it, you ended up with like pink underwear or something if you had whites in there. Okay. That's a good example of like if I dropped food coloring into a beaker of water. So we'll say like food dye into water. I wouldn't even have to stir it, but eventually that food dye would eventually diffuse from where it's highly concentrated in those drops to low concentration throughout that beaker or that cup of water, okay? And it would eventually distribute itself all equally, okay? And that's simple diffusion. That's like a common thing. So like the next time you smell something good, say, diffusion. Love it how that smell gets to me. Well, now we're going to talk about cells. And remember, we just finished talking about the cell membrane. The cell membrane had the two biggest players were the phospholipids and the proteins. Okay, the phospholipids were those little things with heads and tails, and we know that there's a double layer of them. Well, what if something wants to go across the membrane and wants to go across the phospholipids? Well, they got to have two qualifications, okay? Because the phospholipids are lipids, they're like oils, okay? If something wants to go across, so let's just draw something here. If it wants to go across that membrane, it's got to have two qualifications. One, it better be small molecules, because it's got to be small to fit through there, right? And two, it's got to be on the oily side. It's got to be like a lipid. It's got to be like oily, or what we call hydrophobic, or what we even call nonpolar. Okay, so if this video works for ACC or CP classes or even my honors classes, all these terms, okay, go for the different levels. Like if you're in a CP class, you can call it just oily, but you can know that for an honors class. For an honors class, you better know oily. Hydrophobic means it does not like water. And nonpolar, which is again, that molecule that's very symmetrical, okay? And at the different levels, CP has to know oily, and hydrophobic too. ACC has no oily and hydrophobic. Honors, you better know the nonpolar term as well. Okay, so if a molecule is going to cross across the membrane and it's going to go across the phospholipids, we call that diffusion across a membrane, but specifically the phospholipids. And it's got to be small and greasy or oily. Okay, now what if it wants to go across the proteins? Well, we call this a different type of diffusion. We actually call it facilitated. Okay, facilitated diffusion, because we're saying that the proteins are going to facilitate this. Now, let's say we have a molecule, right? And it's too big to pass through the phospholipids and it's not greasy enough, okay? Well, then it might be able to kind of make a deal and scoot through. It can squeeze through this tunnel-like thing. That's like a protein channel there. And there's different types of diffusion across the proteins. You're going to see. We're going to talk about one type. Okay, so this could be any molecule, okay? It just doesn't fit that criteria, so it has to find another way of getting into the cell. But there's going to be two types of facilitated diffusion. Good old osmosis, and we'll go into detail about osmosis in the next video. And then the other one called protein channels. And that's what I've kind of illustrated here in this. This is an example of a protein channel. Okay, now if that protein channel allows water to go through it, okay, because osmosis is a term specifically given for when we're talking about the diffusion of water. Protein channels could let water, they could let sugar, they could let salt, they could let anything through. So these are other molecules. But when it's a protein channel that's letting water through, we actually call those protein channels, or we call those proteins, aquaporins. Aqua for water, porin for like pores. So aquaporins are like what the proteins would be called if it allows water. And we're going to go into more detail about osmosis, especially talking about different solutions. Aqueous solutions that have water as the solvent and all. Okay, so that's our types of passive transport. Remember, no energy is needed, goes from high to a low, kind of like riding that bike down a hill. And there's simple diffusion where there's no boundary, diffusion across the phospholipids. That molecule better be small and oily. But if that molecule is not small and oily, it can use facilitated diffusion where it goes across a protein channel. If that protein channel is just a protein channel, letting any other molecule through, we just call it a protein channel. But if that protein channel allows water to go through, then we give it a special name called aquaporins. And that's it for passive transport. We'll go into osmosis in the next video.